set, go.
So Kurt, tell me something about the Igbo market literature.
It found me in Greenwich Village in about 1974 or 5 in the University Place bookshop, which at the time was the great specialist in African and African American literature in the village. And I was immediately attracted to Mabel the Sweet Honey that poured away, who I picked up off the floor,
Right.
as you pick up so many girls. And as I was telling you earlier, it took 18, 19 years to surmise that it was probably the first written piece of erotica from Africa, written and printed by Africans. It touched it touched something in me. I sometimes think it was a very Catholic part of me, even though I'm happily lapsed. But Catholic maybe with a small c. I heard something that I'd heard in Amos Tutuola's books when I was young that I adored, that I wanted to hear more of. And so I started to collect this pamphletry from Onitsha that started in 1948 and pretty much stopped with the Biafra War in '66. But then picks up again after the war, carrying the torch of literacy into post-literate times in Nigeria. All these printing presses, all these writers, this literary anomaly of this pamphletry literature that comes to life sui generis 150 miles or so up the Niger River in a place that by the time of the Second World War, few people had ever seen white people in Onitsha. And it's this pamphletry is something of a key to the oral literate interface. This is a millennium-old culture, Igbo culture, very important.
But all oral tradition.
All oral traditions that in these two generations, one of which is Chinyuwa's father's, this is Things Fall Apart. It's print literacy that makes things fall apart. At least the traditional ways, the conservative ways of Igbo land, and they have to confront modernity as we all do. Romance, for instance, was not indigenous to Igbo land. It's a literary construct by troubadour poets in the south of France. And the knight in shining armor and the damsel in distress, or distress, are gender tropes that weren't indigenous.
They didn't make sense there.
Which you're going to Onitsha, to Igbo land, not that much after. In '48, the pamphletry is meant to help these newly literate people navigate this change that's changed their morals, changed their ethics, changed the way they think of history, who they are. And it must have, I'm riveted by thinking of you going there during the war and acclimatizing to this world in its being attacked as it is from all points at that point, you know, cultural, political at this point, you know, under attack, being destroyed, and everyone desperately trying to find a safe place, a common ground to stand on.
And this is one of the things actually I write about in my memoir, those years from '67 to 1970 when the civil war in Nigeria, the Biafran War was going on. We lived in Lagos when we were married in end of '64, in 67, in April, we realized it was getting dangerous for us in Lagos as Igbo people, my husband Igbo and our children, our one child then. So we finally left and went to the east to Enugu, which was the capital of Biafra.
Mm-hmm.
Our second child was born there just before the war started, actually a week before the war started. And then the war started, we stayed in Enugu for another 3 months, but when the Nigerians started bombing, then we left to go to my husband's village. So I have 3 chapters in the memoir about that time and how frightening it was and how isolating, but on the other hand, I felt totally safe and protected by my husband's family and clan. They just accepted me in the village. I couldn't ever look like people in the village. I obviously stood out, but I was very comfortable adapting as I needed to going to the market every 4 days on the big market day.
If you could talk the talk, it certainly,
it helped a lot.
You know, the best way to know a people is to be able to speak with them, and of course, becoming part of the family.
Right.
You achieve an intimacy that few outsiders can attain.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't have a deep philosophical conversation in Igbo, but I can certainly carry on a decent conversation.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was quite an experience. And then partway through the war, I was there in the village for a year, September to the next September. By September of that second year of the intense war, my husband and I thought it would be safer if I left with the 2 children. It was becoming difficult to get what we needed in the market, even to get milk for the children and all of that. So we flew out from Uli Airport, the airstrip in Biafra, to Portugal, which is one of the few countries that was accepting flights from Biafra.
Taking in refugees.
And taking in refugees, but also my parents by then had moved to Madeira, the Portuguese island.
Oh, yeah.
So I was able to join them there and stay with them for
serendipitous.
Quite a few months, yes.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I went to the States and stayed in the States for another year. And then when the war ended, I went back.
You went back to Igbo land after the war?
Lagos, back to Lagos. My husband, the war ended in January. By June, my husband was back in Lagos with his, not quite his old job, but a job in the electricity corporation.
And did you continue to visit Igbo land?
Oh yes, all the time.
In shambles, it must have been?
It was in somewhat shambles. Our village itself was intact. We had refugees in the village, but the Nigerian soldiers never came into the village. So it wasn't, that town was not in shambles. Some places were more damaged than others. But we were there again this last Christmas, actually. So
did it radicalize you?
No. No, it didn't.
No?
No.
I mean, it's an interesting war that few people understand very well. I mean, Biafra was under attack by Britain, Russia, France, the Americas.
The Americans didn't really come in much. Britain mainly.
They didn't, but they sent their mercenaries and their CIA and all the fun, that fun bunch.
Right, although there were also a friend of mine, a former Peace Corps volunteer, volunteered with the relief organization, I think it was one of the Catholic relief organizations, and he was flying in and out of Biafra, helping to bring in supplies.
What
they were good Americans too.
What about Igbo culture? What about Igbo sensibility or philosophy did you find akin to what you grew up in or were accustomed to? What were the commonalities?
The commonalities are, of course, love of family. Very, very basic. But one of the differences that I think especially attracted me was the sense of community and the strong family tie. My family of origin, my father was from Germany, my mother from the Midwest. They were a little, let's say, not emotional.
That's a very close to the same ethnic composite.
Right. So I didn't grow up with this sense of real emotional closeness in a family. And I think getting to Nigeria and finding that I didn't have to struggle to be accepted because I could never be fully accepted because I'm so different. But people accepted me despite that. So there wasn't anything of trying to prove myself.
One thing
and the strong sense of community really drew me in.
One thing that drew me in as I got to know the Igbo was that same inclusiveness. When I married into a Coptic family in Egypt, I navigated a lot of differences in cultural attitudes. In a way, I found greater inclusion. I found greater tolerance in the Muslim traditions. I found greater inclusion in the Igbo, who also helped me with a somewhat foreign concept of there being multiple realities, let's say. That there was no single reality that I needed to conform to be accepted.
That makes sense. Yeah.